The Commission will come to order, reconvening the afternoon session of our semi-annual Empower hearing, and we will begin with executives from the Department of Housing and Community Development. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. As always, an honor and a privilege to be with you. I'm Joe C. Hewson, Director of Housing and Building Energy Programs at DHCD. Looking forward to our presentation today. I just want to take a moment and honor and acknowledge and honor, of course, some of the team members here with us that have done, I believe, a very good job. John Bluey, Julia Kalaz, Yetta Stokes, Preston Thomas, Zachary Rockwell, and then at the table we have Nicola Tran and Scott Falvey, both Senior Energy Program Managers, and Nicola will be making our presentation today.
Thank you.
Right.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. My name is Nicola Tran, and I will be taking you through our presentation today. We will begin, as always, with our LIEP program, which is our single-family energy efficiency program for income-eligible households. In the reporting period, the Q1 and Q2 of 2019, participation rates increased very significantly and are now above the forecast curve that we had set for this cycle. So at this point, we're in line to reach the cycle forecasts. And at this point, I didn't prepare a slide, but I did want to pick up the comments on marketing to low-income households that we've had throughout the day today. And you're absolutely right, they are very hard to reach. Those customers that are generally aware of programs that are available to them have participated a long time ago, and they keep applying every year to try to squeeze out what they can from the programs that they know work for them. What we have found over the years is that traditional marketing, such as ads, advertising, marketing in print or radio, does not work as well as does the connection through community-based outreach. Those customers that are generated and referred to us through community-based organizations, through community events that we attend, those are typically the most engaged. They convert really easily. They're very motivated to move forward. So a lot of our marketing focuses on that aspect of community outreach and community engagement. And as we reported in our report, we are launching a very comprehensive referral partner campaign across the state of Maryland, where we're going to be engaging over 700 community organizations, such as food pantries, low-income unemployment offices, senior centers, churches that we want to engage to become a referral partner to equip them with the materials and the knowledge about the programs that we offer, and hope to get to those customers that they are already talking to for other services and that may not have participated yet.
Ms. Tran, before you go on, can I ask you a question?
Yep.
What do you attribute the increase to? I know you talked about your plans, but we're at historically low unemployment rates. The economy is, by many measures, booming.
Yep.
Across all demographic groups. So what do you attribute the increase to? I would expect that it might go down instead of go up.
Well, we increased our outreach efforts. We're sending teams out every month to multiple events in the community, and we've also equipped our network partners with new marketing materials and door hangers to reinforce and increase their efforts on the ground. We also have made it part of our contracts with our network partners to generate leads themselves and not relying on us to only supply leads to them.
I think that's great, and I think this is the first time in 3 years I've seen the forecasted participation rate be below the actual. So, thank you.
You're welcome. One little known tidbit that I wanted to add today is that our single-family program can actually also service multifamily rental communities as long as those communities consist of single-family type housing. So the examples that you see here, townhouse communities, scattered site communities, duplex communities, those are all single-family properties that can participate in our single-family program. And so far, we have served over 500 multi-units in the LIEP program this cycle to date. Another success in this reporting period was that we had the highest rates of leveraging of outside funds. The leveraging in the reporting period was as high as the entire prior cycle combined. And we attributed this to obviously increasing our availability of outside funds, but also enforcing leveraging through our network partners. So we made it mandatory. It's no longer just encouraged, it's mandatory to leverage all outside funds that are available to stretch the Empower funds further. And regarding savings, we just filed, I think a week or two ago, the latest evaluation report from CADMAS about our programs. And they do a billing analysis on the low-income single-family households every year. And they have found verified savings of 11% of the electric consumption of our households on average, and 17% of gas savings of the existing gas consumptions, which is pretty high and compares very well to other programs nationwide that are similar programs. So we indicated the range of benchmark programs on the electric side is between 11 and 12%, on the gas side between 10 and 24%. The depth of savings is really one of the objectives and focus that was set for this program cycle for the low-income program. We had workshops with the stakeholders, with the low-income work group in preparation, and depth of saving is one of the objectives that was brought up by all and supported by all stakeholders. The stakeholders believe that once we are in a household, we shouldn't leave opportunities behind. And redeem all the savings that are available in those households. So that's what the program has traditionally been doing really well at. We do have 2 commission requests on the single-family side in our report. One was a request to update the process for changes to the LIEP incentive or price list. We are requesting that any incentive pricing generated through a competitive bidding process that meets state procurement standards would be exempt from the low-income work group review and PSC approval. We went into length in our report for more detailed information what complication this process has caused the last time around. And then we're also requesting that any other changes or updates to the incentive list, such as adding or removing measures, should not require PSC approval when the low-income work group consents to support the changes. That was a suggestion that Commissioner Richards made at one of our administrative meetings where we had to go through the motions even though the low-income work group had already agreed. And then a second request that we made is regarding the critical medical needs customers. We established a fast track to bring services faster to those clients with critical medical needs. We are requesting again that there could be an exception made for technical requirements for critical equipment that these clients need, such as a repair or replacement of non-functional heating system, cooling systems, or refrigerators. The current program structure and technical requirements are geared towards energy efficiency. They're not geared towards replacing non-functioning equipment, and we've had a very hard time to serve critical medical needs customers with Empower funds.
Does the low-income work group support these recommendations?
Yes. That was a support across the board, and I think you heard it and saw it in most of the comments as well. Okay. And then just real quick, I know there was some confusion about why Washington Gas is reporting on the Washington Gas low-income program and not us, and we just wanted to clarify that Washington Gas initiated their own limited income program, and there was coordination with PSC staff and OPC at the beginning of the cycle to determine that Washington Gas will continue to report and evaluate their own program as long as it is their program. So we'll continue on that path. I'll move on over to the MEET program, unless you wanted to address any single-family questions at this point. Okay, so our MEET program is a follow-up program to the Low-Income Energy Efficiency Program. It consists of an annual site visit to re-engage customers, reinforce energy-efficient behavior, and to maintain energy-efficient equipment. It started as planned at the beginning of this year. It's a pilot program just in Baltimore City, and it's going pretty well so far. What we did find is that we would need to recruit more customers. In our program plan, we had requested to recruit from LIHEAP customers that had completed their LIHEAP project within the past 3 years. We're now requesting to be able to go back 5 years to recruit more customers, and to also identify those that are ready for a re-entry into the LIHEAP program, which has a lockout period of 5 years.
So in order to be eligible for the MEET program, you have had to have participated in a LIHEAP program?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
And how long has that program been in existence?
The MEET program
Yeah.
started as a pilot at the beginning of this year.
Okay.
Keep forgetting to turn my microphone on. Was this program on, then off, then on again?
No, this was a new pilot that we had proposed in our plan, and we had proposed for it to start at this year so that we had 1 year to prepare for it.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I'm moving over to our multifamily program, the MEEHA program. On this chart, you can see that the MEEHA program has already received enough applications to achieve the program cycle forecasts in most territories. So the red curve is our program cycle forecast for participation of units. The orange part is the projects that have completed so far. The green ones are in process. Those are committed and already under construction. The light blue ones are applications in process and that will commit very soon. And then the dark gray ones, those are units that have applications submitted. So you'll see there's a lot of demand specifically in BG&E and the PEPCO territories, and we have 2 additional years to complete those units. You know, the MEEHA projects, they can take about a year to complete, so as time progresses, most of these units that are in progress should move through to completion. And we just wanted to illustrate that again, that the MEEHA program has a full year carryover period. So we're right now in year 2 of the program cycle that ends at the end of next year, and then the MEEHA program has a whole nother year because of the length of those projects to complete the projects that are already in the pipeline. Similarly to LIHEAP, the MEEHA program was also evaluated by CADMAS, and the savings on the household level are even better than the LIHEAP program. On the electric side, households save on average 13% of their pre-existing consumption, and on the gas side, approximately 24% of their pre-existing consumption. And that's all I had on our programs. I know you're going to ask me about the low-income goal. If you weren't, I'm going to be quiet, but otherwise, I was trying to preempt the question, and I know we have another session later in the day about the work group activity, but just to clarify, DHCD's position is that we're not opposed to having a goal, but we have no position on what specifically the goal should be. What we have observed in the work group is the lack of consensus, mainly due to a lack of clarity of what the objectives of the program should be. So should it be equity? Should it be reducing energy burden? Should it be high participation rates? Should it be the volume of savings, which is, you know, what the energy advocates strive for? Should it be the depth of savings? Should it be any combination of any of those? So that was very unclear, and all stakeholders had, you know, a different interest. And then the second, as OPC mentioned, is also a lack of data on potential costs or benefits of any of such goals. And that was mainly the reason why we believe there was no consensus so far.
Let me follow up on that.
Yep.
NRDC seems to think that there's no way that the low-income working group is ever going to come to a consensus on that. Do you share that view?
I can't say for sure. I do want to say that the low-income work group has a lot of value in the planning and the implementation of the program. So it's been very valuable in the program planning and in converting policy into implementation. When it comes to setting policy, I think the interests are very varying on a lot of different sides. There is that component of competition or potential duplication of programs when we have two different goals and it's not clear who's responsible for where. So I can see that it's going to be difficult.
Thank you.
You raise a good point, Ms. Tran, because obviously the work group should not be determining policy. The commission should be providing that policy guidance to the work group to perhaps break some of these log jams or issues which are preventing the work group from moving forward. So I appreciate your sort of unvarnished perspective on that.
I was just going to ask, what did you think of the recommendation that there be an independent facilitator? Do you think that would help this process or get to some of these resolutions, or as the chairman just stated, is that just going to be something we have to do?
I think it would certainly help. Specifically on our side, we have been taking on the effort of convening the work groups, of organizing the process, which takes a lot of our resources away as well.
So that's a yes. Then who would you recommend?
I don't know.
organization?
PC staff organizes the work groups, all other work groups.
Sorry, OPC staff?
I'm sorry, PSC staff.
PSC,
Yeah.
okay, yes.
I was just going to ask you if you had the money in your budget for a facilitator. I suppose not.
No.
The MEET program, we saw the picture of the family sitting around the table. That program's been in effect now 9 or 10 months.
Yeah.
How many households have you touched during that period?
So it was 63 in the reporting period. We're now around 100.
And it's been well received?
It's been very well received with the participants. We're seeing a lot of response on the behavior side. Customers really appreciate the person-to-person communication that comes with the program. It's not, a set of random recommendations how they can save energy. The analyst goes through the house with them, shows them how to maintain their equipment efficiently, shows them, oh, here, I saw your TV was on and nobody was watching. That would be a specific recommendation. So it's very customized and very personal.
I'd also like obviously the human touch is leading to more success reaching out to some of the lower income households. We heard from MEA earlier today that they believe that the Empower marketing needs to be improved by the utilities to make the utility programs more successful. Do you have any advice on that point with regard to what our utilities should be doing to increase their reach to these households?
So I believe that the utilities are already doing a really good job, and they can probably continue on that trajectory to continue mentioning and bringing up the low-income programs whenever they're already doing outreach. Because on their side, they don't know exactly who is an income-eligible customer. So as long as it's included in most of their outreach, I think that's already doing a lot. For our sides, the really community-based focus, as long as they have the capacity to do that as well, that's very helpful as well. But that's really what's the most effective.
So I'd like to get your response to comments made by the Maryland Energy Efficiency Advocates regarding the coordination between the utilities and DHCD on the thermostat programs. In their comments, and I'll just quote them directly, they say coordination is virtually non-existent. So as you know, we've had some recommendations that we make some changes to the thermostat programs. So I'd like to get your response to that. I mean, do you see that there's needs to be improvement, or is it working well as it is?
No, I do agree that we need to increase coordination on the thermostat side, and we have recently started that process with BG&E to come to a process that works for both sides. So we are coordinating with the utilities when we install a thermostat in the home, that customer then also gets enrolled in their demand response program. And likewise, if we find that they already have the demand response program in their home, that thermostat does not get removed, and we will forego, in that case, the thermostat replacement. So we have initiated that process with BG&E, and we've reached out to the other utilities to do more work on that end, because we do agree there's more need.
Okay. I have another question, but I think I'm gonna wait for now. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Commissioner. I do recall, and I don't remember where I saw this. We have a lot of paper in front of us, but there was a recommendation made by some party that there needed to be greater coordination between the utilities and DHCD. Perhaps you saw that in the comments, but
In what regard do you recall?
I don't recall, and maybe I could find that later, but some party was requesting that the commission direct both DHCD and the utilities to coordinate more. So if it's not on your radar, we could
Yeah.
disregard for the time being.
I mean, just to give you an update of what is already happening, we still have regular implementer meetings with the utilities, OPC staff, and PSC staff every 3 months. We have individual calls with the utilities frequently in between those meetings to do such coordination as marketing and the smart thermostat that we're increasing as well. And as far as additional coordination, I think that they also participate in all of the low-income work group meetings. So we see them, at least 4 times a month, or talk to them at least 4 times a month these days. So
Okay, so basically every week.
yeah, exactly. And
We also do coordinate our programs. So we have the MEEHA program is coordinating with Delmarva's multifamily program. So we're coordinating projects with them as well.
yeah, that's
Commissioner O'Donnell assisted me just now. It was the NRDC filing where they raised an issue saying coordination between the utilities and DHCD remain insufficient to assure that low-income customers are receiving the full benefits from smart thermostats.
okay.
So
So it was
specifically,
regarding smart thermostats.
yes. Thank you. Any additional questions for the department?
Yes, on your recommendation or for the critical medical needs customers, how do you determine who a critical medical need is?
They have to submit a physician's note that states why the lack of heating, cooling, or refrigerator exacerbates their medical condition.
Okay, and the utilities have programs for customers with medical needs, in terms of, they still have to pay their bill, but, with cutoffs and things like that. So do you is there an opportunity for coordinating there?
Yeah. So the Critical Medical Needs Program is driven by the Cancer Support Foundation and OPC, and they regularly organize coordinating groups calls between the utilities. OHEP is pretty deeply involved in this program as well, and us on our end as well. And most of these customers, they get referred from one of the navigators in the Critical Medical Needs Program to OHEP, then to us, and to the utility.
Okay. And I see that you set forth in your comments a chart talking about, Empower seems to potentially require more than the MEEP, and you want us to go to the MEEP requirements. Is that right?
So the MEEP requirements that's a program that specifically gears towards replacing non-functional equipment. So it is not geared towards energy efficiency savings. And that program has less stringent requirements on achieving savings. And those requirements, that's typically the funding source that we are able to use to replace any non-functioning cooling or heating equipment. And that's why we're asking that the same technical requirements could be applied on the Empower side.
Okay, when you say technical requirements, do you mean all of these requirements
Yep.
that are listed here
Yep.
on page 15? I guess the one that troubles me is the very bottom one. about the landlord, empower the landlord, if assuming the person doesn't own the home, the landlord has to contribute to the new equipment. And under the MEEP, there's no contribution.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, what prevents a landlord from getting, a new furnace and then kicking out the person with the medical needs and taking advantage of that?
So we
And I think that's
yeah.
what the Empower is.
Yeah, we do have a building owner agreement with every landlord that requires that there would be no eviction for the course of at least a year, based on the project that they participate in. But that could be an exception of that requirement. The main requirements that prevent us from using the Empower fundings is the age of the equipment. So you can see on the chart that a furnace has to be at least 10 years or older. Sometimes we have an 8-year-old furnace that fails, and we can't replace it with that. So even if it's just the top part of the technical requirements, that would be a help.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful.
Just a comment. So the utilities get a lot of kudos for their energy efficiency and power programs, and rightfully so. But the state agencies typically not so much. But I have to tell you, I've seen DHCD improve steadily, including again this year. And 3 years ago when I got here, it was a little rockier. But I have to tell you, I'm pleased with what I see coming out of DHCD, and I wanted to say that publicly in this setting. So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, speaking on behalf of the commission, we do appreciate your commitment, the entire staff team that has come up from New Carrollton this afternoon, all day today. So we know the good work that you're doing, and these statistics and the reports indicate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, we will invite work group panel leaders to present with respect to the numerous reports that were filed with the commission. Afterwards, we will take public comment from interested parties, and we'll finish up the day with staff conclusions.
Yes, please.
We currently have before us either 7 plans. Oh, okay. Timeout. The core reporter is going to be taking appearances.
Eric Bupko. Ed Miller, Potomac Edison.
Wayne Hutters with Pepco Holdings.
Nathaniel Gillespie, Pepco Holdings. Gillespie. Gillespie.
Okay. Ma'am, are you a part of this panel?
Just in case there's questions on limited income work group.
Okay, if you could just provide your name.
Yeah, Julia Gillas, K-A-L-L-O-Z, DHCD.
Thanks. My apologies that we're out of chairs. At this point, we will review the reports and the plans that were filed with respect to this Empower cycle. So, Mr. Hurley, I will turn it over to you and regarding which order we'll take them up.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Dan Hurley on behalf of staff. I guess probably want to start with maybe our 2 non-consensus items, and since Ms. Kalaz is standing at the podium, maybe we should start with the limited income work group report. And I guess the limited income work group status update report kind of goes hand in hand with that report.
This is Julia Kalas, DHCD. So DHCD was the facilitator of the low-income work group for the past year. The request in the filing was, from the order, was that the work group would consider a low-income, whether they could agree on a low-income a low-income goal for Empower. It was a non-consensus agreement. The group could not agree on a specific low-income goal. Did not come to agreement. Most of the areas of non-agreement was about the lack of agreement on objectives, what the limited income goal should be, and identifying that some of the members felt that the group did not have the ability to set policy. There was one of the parties, the Maryland Energy Efficiency Advocates and OPC, had consistent agreement and advocacy for one specific goal, was not shared with the others. The report that was filed included submissions from each of the work group main stakeholder areas, the utilities, PSC staff, OPC, and the advocates, as well as DHCD, on their opinions on the goal in general that was submitted. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to see what I can do.
Thank you. Do we have questions for Ms. Kalish?
Kalas.
Kalas. We do not, but based on what we've heard today, and it appears that there's a divide between OPC, the advocates, and everybody else. So it's this is an issue where the commission will need to provide some policy guidance to break the logjam. Thank you. Mr. Hurley, do we have anything else with respect to this report?
No, Your Honor. I guess we'll move on to, our next non-consensus would be the Phase 2 of Coordinated Natural Gas Electric Plan.
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Please.
I did have a comment regarding the limited income working group report, if I may.
Please do.
And sorry for interrupting Mr. Hurley with staff. The one thing that I feel that's important to communicate is, we've seen a lot of information today regarding limited income energy savings across the Empower portfolio. And I just want to highlight that I think that percentage of savings that was presented significantly underestimates the energy savings that Empower is achieving from limited income customers. I'd like to note that there's two reasons for that. Reason number one is what was reported in the utilities Q1 and Q2 reports is based on what's referred to as the known limited income customers. Typically, when utilities only know a subset or a small portion of the total limited income population. So I think that's one of the reasons why the energy savings are underestimated. The second reason is what was reported excluded the savings of limited income customers in several no to low cost programs, and I'll highlight residential lighting as one, as well as the home energy report behavioral offering, which, as we know in other discussion today, both of those programs have significant energy savings across the Empower utilities. So I just wanted to highlight that, for the Commission's awareness. I will note that when you look at the Empower portfolios collectively across the utilities and DHCD, all the utilities have lower cost programs that limited income customers are participating in. DHCD is also providing comprehensive weatherization program to the limited income customers as well. So again, I just want to highlight that I think the Empower portfolios, as they're designed, does target much more energy savings from limited income customers. And I just wanted to communicate that I think that some of the information presented may not be, might not present the whole picture regarding limited income participating in and benefiting from the Empower programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Well said, Mr. Miller.
At the risk of going backwards instead of forwards, I'm going to ask OPC to remind me what your recommended goal is in this regard for limited income.
Sure. Our recommended goal for limited income was 1% of electric retail sales and 0.5% of gas retail sales. And I would say our recommendation it takes into account the fact that we know there are limited income customers participating in programs that are not defined as limited income programs. And part of the discussion that we had as in the working group was, how do we determine what the limited income participation is? Is there a way, what's the best way for us to figure out how much participation is actually occurring? That is one of the issues that.
Right, and part of this process is the education of us, maybe me, but trying to figure out what that goal translate, what the basis of that goal is. Is it conservation? Is it social justice? Is it some other considerations of fairness? Is it equity? What is the basis of those numbers?
Sure. From our perspective, in terms of arriving at the number, we did look at what other states are doing. So, in terms of getting at the number, but for us, it is multiple goals. We need to. Part of it is, of course, energy savings and lowering the energy burden of people on the lower income. But it is also that the equity issue of lower income people who are paying into the Empower program, but not experiencing as many of the benefits from participation in the program. And we think that everybody who pays into the Empower program should benefit approximately, comparably when it comes to what they are able to get out of the program.
Thank
But,
you.
but we just heard that, and you agreed that there are low-income people who are likely participating in lighting and other programs. So how do you know that what you just said is true?
Well, again, we
That-
took this
that
into
that they're
account.
paying into it and not getting anything out of it. I mean, that it sounds somewhat contradictory, because you agreed that there were people participating in programs, so they're getting something. For example, I contribute, and I may not go out and buy the light bulbs or whatever, but I contribute. So I'm just curious how it is you think that how you say with such certainty that there is inequity without knowing and being able to address that point.
Well, I think that we took that point into consideration when setting the 1% goal. When we looked at comparable low-income goals in other states, what we found was there were other states that had higher percentages set for low-income goals, but they also had more specific ways of being able to identify which savings were attributable to low-income customers. So we took into account the differences between what we can determine here in Maryland, what we can definitively say is low income. We took that into account in terms of where we thought the goal should be in relationship to some of the leading states on this issue.
Right, and with respect to your proposal for 1%, what would be a low income or a limited income person? Where would be that level?
That would follow the current definitions, which I believe go up to approximately 200% of the poverty line.
Mm-hmm. And how would you be able to measure that goal? How would you be able to measure compliance with the goal if that information isn't available? How is that information about a person's economic situation going to be part of the program? Are they going to have to say, okay, don't you end up in the same position that there's people who are participating, who are in that category, who are not using that program but using this program? Don't you kind of continue to perpetuate the undercounting potentially?
Well, what we're looking at is we can definitively identify through a lot of the DHCD programs which customers receiving benefits are low income. We have a known quantity there. We also can say with relative certainty that the lighting programs that distribute light bulbs through the food banks are probably lower income customers, and that's I think we can safely attribute those savings to low income people. And that's why when we set the goal, we took into account that we know there are low income participating in other programs, but given what we know and can measure definitively at this point in time, we thought that was an appropriate goal.
Right, and you don't know what the cost would be of these programs, of the 1% goal. You don't have an idea of the cost of the 1% goal?
Well,
or maybe you do.
No, we don't. We haven't looked at specifically what, if any, additional efforts would be required. It might be simple, changes in outreach strategy to increase participation. So it's really hard to say, whether there will be an increase in cost, and if so, what that would be.
Okay, thank you.
At this point, Mr. McClellan, we'll turn to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon again, Mr. Chairman and Commission. Josh McClellan with Washington Gas. This is just to cover some of our perspective of the development of the Phase 2 plan and also a response to some of OPC's comments regarding the development of the Phase 2 plan. I'd like to just take a moment to make the Commission aware of what's been going on with the Phase 2 plan over the past few months or the earlier months of 2019. I would say that the Gas and Electric Coordinated Work Group was extremely active between the months of April until about September in order to get this plan developed and out the door to the Commission for approval. During that time frame, myself and my colleague Steve Burr essentially took this task on, and it sort of became our full-time jobs during these coming months. And the reason why I bring that up is because we wanted to devote enough time and resources to this work group and to this plan because we really emphasized and prioritized an open dialogue and a collaborative environment with our partnering utilities and all the parties to the work group. We wanted to make sure that the plan included everybody's opinion, and we wanted to have an open discussion and be extremely transparent with everyone involved to make sure that come hearing time or come the time for the Commission to look over the plan, there were no surprises or there were no items that were contentious by anybody at the work group. So with that being said, we definitely made sure that there were opportunities for everyone in the work group to chime in and provide their comments and ask their questions and allow us to, as a work group, to sort through any items that were part of the Phase 2 plan. And so upon seeing OPC's comments, we were a little surprised to see that there was not a consensus with the Phase 2 plan. We've had multiple meetings over the past few months. We've had multiple emails and phone call conversations with all the parties involved, and there has been ample opportunities for everyone to weigh in on one decision or another. And we submitted this plan to the Commission under the impression that there was a consensus with the work group.
To be clear, OPC was a part of the work group?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Just allow me a second to collect my thoughts here. And so I guess we can move on to some of the other comments that OPC had. I know one of the things that stood out to the OPC is seeing the definition of fuel neutrality and how that relates to the Phase 2 plan. It was not the intent of the Phase 2 plan to define fuel neutrality. There was a separate fuel neutrality report that set out to define fuel neutrality. Now, they were complementary to one another, but fuel neutrality was not one of the main metrics that we use in order to develop Phase 2 of the plan. We can almost consider that Phase 2 would be a proxy through which a neutral incentive program could be implemented. So if there is any non-consensus with the definition of fuel neutrality with the work group moving forward, we recommend that that shouldn't hold up the approval and the implementation of the Phase 2 plan.
And is the current consensus definition, is it a consensus definition, number one? Is it the definition that staff provided, quote, providing electric and natural gas customers with the opportunity to receive equitable incentives for comparable electricity or natural gas savings measures?
I believe it is, but I'll defer
Yeah,
to Mr. Hurley.
That's the definition that was put into the work group report.
Thank you.
And then moving on to another item that was brought up was the incentive structure itself. We proposed as part of Phase 2 of the plan that the gas equipment measures that were to be implemented into the existing electric programs would have their own unique dollar per MMBTU amount. And this was presented before the work group. There were other options to be considered by the work group. We proposed 3 different options, all with varying differences to be considered for the work group. And ultimately, it was decided that the dollar that each piece of gas equipment would have its own unique dollar amount in terms of incentives. And the reason why this was decided upon was I will admit that there is a level of complexity to this, and it is not as straightforward as Phase 1. However, we did consult with some of the program implementers to see how heavy a lift would it be to implement this kind of incentive model, and it was relatively light in terms of cost and time. And so that was definitely a consideration. We wanted to make sure that this plan was cost effective and that we weren't going to burden extra costs towards complexity.
And how many measures are there? It's only a handful, if I recall.
Correct. There's only 4 right now. It's our higher efficiency, so what we consider Tier 2. That would be a residential boiler, a furnace, a tankless water heater, and a storage water heater.
Thank you. Ms. Ryan, would you like an opportunity to respond? And it appears that the Washington Gas representative was caught off guard with respect to OPC's response, and it does appear that OPC participated throughout the work group process, April through September?
Correct. Correct, yes. And I want to clarify again that we do support moving on with Phase 2 and the integration of the programs. Our concern is with the incentive levels. And that also relates to our concern with the definition of fuel neutrality. We think that the incentive levels really need to be reviewed, and that's a process that makes sense to move forward with the definition of fuel neutrality, which was not broadly discussed with the work group. And I think, I'm going to say, I think that part of that was a matter of time. The definition of fuel neutrality is a fairly complicated issue, and how you define it can support different policy goals. And I think that there need to be a series of conversations within the work group about which goals do we want to support, and how are we going to define fuel neutrality for that purpose. And I think that revisiting the incentive amounts for Washington Gas is appropriately done along with that kind of understanding of what we're trying to achieve.
Did People's Council have time to propose their own definition of fuel neutrality, or was it only the Staff Council's definition on the table?
We did not see any opportunity.
But did you see the definition before it was filed on September 30th?
I think the first time we saw it was when the draft was circulated.
Yeah, when would that have been?
I don't recall.
About a week prior.
Okay, thank you.
And the definition was changed from the original draft. There were comments and suggestions for edits to that definition.
Any other comments from parties at the table?
I just have one more comment, if I may. On the incentive, on the performance-based incentive for the gas measures, I think the discussion during the work group process noted that with a $1 to $3 incentive for the gas measures, those 4 measures that were being proposed to be added to the home performance with Energy Star, the performance-based incentive would have been lower than the current prescriptive measure incentive. So these measures are also available on a prescriptive basis. So in order to make it more of a performance-based incentive, we felt it was needed to raise the incentives at least minimally to meet the prescriptive measure incentive, and then add some for the performance-based incentive.
Thank you, Ms. Levin.
Thank you. I just wanted to add a couple of comments about this, and recognize the amount of work that Washington Gas and the electric utilities did in the April through September period to develop the Phase 2 proposal. Just to clarify the work group involvement, a lot of that work involved the utilities working directly together to develop the incentive structure and with their program implementers. There was one work group meeting in August where some high-level concepts were shared, and then there was a more formal proposal circulated to the full work group about a week before the deadline. So while there was a lot of very good work by the utilities and their implementers, it wasn't necessarily as broadly. OPC, for example, didn't have an opportunity to be as involved in that.
Were you excluded from those utility work group proceedings, or you were unable to participate?
I'm not sure we were aware that they were happening. Would Ms. Ryan like to comment on that?
Yeah, I do believe there were conversations that were limited to Washington Gas and the utilities. And to a certain extent, I think that was appropriate, but it did mean that some of the issues we learned about a little later than ideal.
Right. So I'm just trying to clarify why we may have appeared to bring these issues up kind of at the last minute. And so just to clarify where things stand, I think OPC and VEIC would support moving forward with the Phase 2 incentives as is, but would suggest that the work group continue to think about the fuel neutrality and kind of double check we're all comfortable with the proposed incentive levels, because there just wasn't a lot of time to review them. The full proposal with all the detailed levels was circulated about a week in advance. Some written comments were shared during that time, but not necessarily, there wasn't a work group meeting at that point. So there just was kind of a limited amount of time for a full review, as well as the fuel neutrality definition, which may require some additional analysis. So I think that's a process that could continue via discussion at the work group in parallel without holding up the implementation of the Phase 2 coordinated incentives.
And I want to just clarify that point, because you said you're still supportive of Phase 2, but is your position that the Commission not approve Phase 2 at this time?
I think our position is that you should support Phase 2, but should also encourage the work group to continue working through this. And there's some flexibility in the incentive levels anyway. There were incentive ranges proposed in the performance-based incentive structure. So ideally, as the work group gains consensus and around the fuel neutrality definition and whether it's appropriate to have different levels for different measures, that could be refined, but I don't think it's a reason to hold up the approval in the meantime.
Well, thank you for that clarification, and I do agree with respect to the definition. It seems on its face, at least to this commissioner, that it's somewhat reasonable, but if the work group needs more time to better flesh that out, if there wasn't enough time in September to do so, I think that'd be reasonable for the work group to consider. Thank you. Commissioner Herman? Oh, sorry.
Mr. McClellan, we heard earlier today from counsel for PEPCO that there was, sounded like some significant optimism for this coordination. Do you share the optimism and the excitement about the future of the programs?
That's a great question, and wholeheartedly, yes. I'm very optimistic, enthusiastic about not only the work that we've completed so far, and I would remind the Commission that this level of coordination to get these programs up and running has been pretty unprecedented so far in Empower Maryland. So the good work that we have done, I've been very pleased with, and I'm very enthusiastic about the potential of programs where we can coordinate together in the future.
Thank you.
If this was covered earlier, I apologize, but I wanted to ask you about if you had an opinion about, because it's in the 2020 coordination agreement, about Mr. McGee's request on behalf of the HVAC contractors that they be allowed to kind of feather out their existing stock by certain dates. The other utilities seem to agree with that, but I don't know that I heard from Washington Gas on that.
Is that in reference to a midstream program?
Yes.
I can speculate or formulate opinion on the status of that in a midstream program.
So you don't have a concern though, you just don't know.
Right.
Okay, fair enough.
Thank you. With that, Mr. Hurley, what is our next report to consider?
Well, even with the topic of coordination, we can talk about the new construction, electric and gas residential new construction program plan, which has been discussed today. I don't know if anyone wants to repeat their position, but I know staff did not, we have our position written in our comments, but we did note two of our concerns, which were similar to what OPC expressed as far as going beyond the requirements and running a dual program for 1 year. Now, we did note in our comments that we don't think that's a deal breaker, given the fact that I believe it's 4 contractors who are not interested in moving to a full Energy Star program and have homes lined up to put in gas measures. So we don't consider that a deal breaker, but we just want to make the commission aware of that. It's, you're going to have a 2-track program, and then on the other hand, with the Energy Star 3.1 requirements, that Washington Gas is going to offer additional efficient measures of gas that go beyond those requirements just for this 1 year.
Just for the 1 year, they'll be allowed to use these Energy Star 3.1.
And then for the next program cycle, the groups will get together and determine how we're best to go forward with that construction plan.
Okay. And the timetable for this program to be up and running is relatively quick. Oh, over your shoulder, he's taking a seat.
Josh McClown again. Thank you. The new construction program, I believe, we're set to, I think that the plan proposed a January 1, 2020 launch.
Okay, so less than 3 months from now. All right, thank you. Any other questions on the new construction program?
If I might add a comment, I know we expressed some concerns in our report about this, and I just want to add that based on the discussion that we've heard today and the transitional nature that has been proposed with respect to this program and the contractors, we're more comfortable with it at this point.
Thank you for sharing that. Mr. Hurley.
So the next report we'll talk about is the Home Performance with Energy Star Q4 Trope Report, which was filed by the utilities.
Thank you. Yes, this was filed by Mr. Mike Keel with PHI. This is another consensus report?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, this was a consensus report. It's a report that I believe we file every year. In that, I don't believe we heard any concerns with the report from any other parties. I believe the report speaks for itself.
So we have this report, and then we have the other home performance report, the PBI report. Is that correct?
We kind of talked about the PBI report was with the incentive structure and the fuel neutral definition, so we already really kind of discussed that one.
Okay. Do commissioners have questions on either home performance report? Moving on.
Last report would be the midstream report.
Okay.
And as was discussed earlier today, utilities filed their plans. We had some responses to what they were proposing to September 15th. The Alliance had proposed a different kind of formalized timeline for moving from the incentive-based program to the midstream program, and there was agreement as was discussed earlier.
And again, we appreciate the air conditioning professionals and contractors working this out with the utilities in advance. Okay, with that, are there any more comments on the reports?
Does OPC, do you still have comments on the midstream report and setting some kind of a minimum, I guess, direct rebate standard, or where does OPC stand on
Yeah, we did address this in our report, so I'll keep it short right now. We continue to recommend that there be a defined amount of the rebate to pass through to the end-use customer. In reviewing the reports filed by the utilities, the amount, the percentage of the incentive that's making it to customers varies, and we just think it would help the end user, understand the choices they're making and how Empower is helping them be more efficient if there is a specified amount of incentive that gets passed through.
Okay, and I think one of the issues that was raised that is just on the, I don't know, call it marketing or just the education to ensure that that citizens and customers realize that this was an Empower program. Has that discussion evolved at all, and have you been able to come up with ideas of how you might better educate citizens about this program, the midstream program, or is that something that the OPC still has real concerns with?
I think we do still have concerns with that. I know that we have had informal conversations with some of the other work group members on that issue, but I do think that is an issue that would be worth looking at. Because when it is hidden, people don't necessarily make when the incentive is hidden at the midstream level, people don't necessarily make that connection. So I do think that, marketing and how that's addressed is something that could be looked into a little bit further.
Okay, further, so it's not, I got the impression from the report that this was something that the work group is in fact working on now. Is that not correct?
I think to this point, it has been more focused on the pragmatics of the transition, and the issues of the marketing and consumer education have been, to an extent part of that, but a little more secondary to the actual how the transition is going to occur.
Okay, well, thank you.
Commissioners, I'd like to comment on that. One of the things, and we've talked about this, I think, a number of times as we talked about midstream, is kind of what the definition of midstream is. The definition, if we're saying that we're passing a specified amount onto the consumer, we're really talking about an instant discount program. We're not talking about a midstream program. And the reason why that's important is we're not trying to get the consumer to do anything. In a midstream program, we're trying to get the distributor or retailer, just like the Energy Star retail products platform. So there's I think a difference in how people are defining that, and that's where some of this confusion could come into play. Does that make any?
Well, yes. I guess how I understood this the debate is that while the midstream goes to the distributor or to the retail, there was this desire that to ensure that some of the rebate or some of the I guess incentive ends up with the consumer, and so setting a percentage. Am I stating that correctly? Is that what the discussion how it?
That yes
Okay.
is what OPC's concern is.
Okay, and in this case, in some circumstances, retailers or distributors are making sure customers are getting some of that money. In other cases, they may not be, and I think the discussion is whether we should say a set percentage, 10%, 20%, should in fact go to the customer. Is that?
That is something that could be done, and I say it that way because that would not be consistent then with the order we were given to move to Energy Star Retail Products Platform, which is where we give the retailer a small incentive to make sure they're stocking this type of product, and over time you would ratchet that level up so that you're making the market more and more efficient, and all of the products available are more efficient. So just to kind of note that we would then be, if we're prescribing an amount to go to the consumer, we're now separating something between what's been ordered for the retail product side versus the distributor product side.
So, I guess I'm having a little, and Ms. Rayleigh's right there, and so I was just going to wave this around and say 306%. So what is, and Ms. Rayleigh, that is a midstream program, the 300 and right? That's what you told me earlier?
Looking at is for the ESRPP.
And-
But based on the HVAC midstream for us, we have fully launched, where the other utilities are getting ready to fully launch. So I would say that for us, in the report, we put 95% of the incentive is being passed on to our members, to the customer member. I think with the other utility, it was a pretty high percentage on the items that they do have in the midstream being passed on. So I caution that if we set a certain amount, then the distributor may keep more based on that amount that's set. Because based on right now, 95% of the incentive is being passed on to the customer for us.
Well,
So
I
hate
guess
to-
I'm confused because what I just heard and what I had in my mind that we were testing and trying out was that there's a, I'll call it an incentive, but there's some amount that goes to the distributor or to the manufacturer or whomever, and they stock more of the, therefore they stock more, or they build more of these more efficient.
Well, there's kind of two programs.
Well, wait a second. Let me finish. They build more of these efficient pieces of equipment, and that therefore then customers are buying those more efficient because that's what's in the store. What's in the store is stuff that's more efficient. So therefore, there's nothing being passed. I'm going to say passed on. They're not getting any kind of the price that's there, to the extent that the distributor reflects it in its sale to to the seller of the piece of equipment would reflect it, but that the marketing would say, hey, this, the purchase of this is supported by Empower, but they wouldn't get any kind of like special discount. So that's what I had in my mind as midstream. Am I,
Well, there's
is
a
your
couple
program different?
Couple different variables of midstream. The ESRPP, which is the appliance side, that's essentially what that is doing now. A small portion is being given to the distributor to stock the more efficient and sell the more efficient items. For the HVAC midstream, when we transitioned to that, we kept the same incentive level and transitioned over. So those incentives are being given to the distributor, and they are passing it along to the contractor to pass to the customer.
But that's up to them, isn't it?
It
It's
is.
not. It's not
We
up
haven't been-
to us. We haven't dictated that
We
they do
haven't
that.
dictated, and SMECO has found, since we fully launched our HVAC midstream, that 95% of that incentive is being passed to our member. And you had our slides up, the marketing section. We have a letter that we send out to our HVAC customers, our members, after they've purchased that, and the contractor has reported it back to the distributor, and the distributor is reporting it back to us. We send them a letter following up, thanking them for their purchase, and showing that this is the rebate or instant discount that you got from your contractor, because the contractor is reporting back to us, letting us know what they're passing on to the member.
So I'm just trying to understand now, where, one second, I'm still working through this, okay? Trying to understand now, where, where is midstream? Because that, while they have the right to do that, they can do that, but they don't have to do that. Do I have that correct?
Correct. And on the Exelon company side, we have not specified that amount because the distributors have said, we need this amount of money to provide for staffing, to process these, to kind of as their administrative costs. So we had not specified an amount, and you can also look at it from what would happen in the future. So one of the reasons we were asked to start moving to midstream for HVAC was to reduce some of the costs of this program. And by just taking that same amount, and that's where we've all started, it would be over time we start to modify that and adjust the rebate levels. For example, if $50 to the distributor ends up stocking more 16 SEER air conditioners, that is a much more better use of money than saying giving $500 for that air conditioner at the consumer level. So as you start to move through this, and as the program matures, you can start to lessen that amount, or say, okay, we'll give you $100 if it's an 18 SEER for the distributor, so that either they can use that for marketing that product, for profit margin assistance, whatever they want to do in order to just get more of that product out on the market, and make it the minimum of what people could buy.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. Ryan, a follow-up if you're done.
Yes.
You done?
I'm sorry?
Were you done?
I was going to give Ms. Levin, who's been standing there very patiently.
Well, I want to hear from Ms.
Quietly.
Ryan from OPC specifically on this point.
Sure.
And then we'll give Vermont a chance to speak. We heard from another state. But Maryland OPC, based on what SMECO just told you, you still assert, if that's true, that we should specify the amount passed through? Or should we let it flow through at a natural level respond to that, because it seems like you want to give less help to the residential consumer.
Well, SMECO is, does have a very high pass-through rate, and, that's great for them. We applaud them for that. But the pass-through rates vary from utility to utility, and even within utilities, they're going to vary from contractor to contractor. And so our hope is to have more consistency and transparency in the process.
Even if it means less money is getting to the residential consumer.
I don't think it necessarily needs to mean that less money is getting to the residential consumer.
That's some empirical data right there.
We know what their rebates are, but we have their information, but we could set the pass-through amount at 95%.
Thank you for that. I'm sorry to cut you off. You're free to comment.
Just to add a nuance to what I believe is OPC's position as we work it out in real time, I think what I would recommend is that we continue down the path. It's been very difficult to see how well the midstream HVAC rollout is going, because it's still been in the launch phase. It was in the launch phase in the last semi-annuals. It's still kind of in the launch phase. The program overall is underperforming, so I do think we need to continue to keep an eye on it, but we also don't want to cut the legs out from under it before we've given it a chance to fully take off. So I think my recommendation would be we can see it play out, and if there isn't sufficient participation and uptake, or there continues to be a lack of traction in the program, then we might look at steps like defining a set pass-through amount that could be helpful. It may be premature to do that now, since the program is still in the startup phase. It was notable to me in the utility reports the level of traction they are now getting in the retail products platform versus the midstream HVAC. I think that illustrates the potential through midstream program design. And then to speak to some of Commissioner Herman's questions, I think I would also add that you need to look at the actual market you're trying to transform, and the retail market is quite different than the wholesale distributed products market. Most of the products are somewhat lower cost. You're influencing stocking practices at retail. You may not need as much money to influence the behavior, both the stocking practice and then the consumer purchase decision. The HVAC program, those are big ticket items. We believe there is still a first cost barrier. It's great to hear in SMECO's program that 95% of that incentive is getting passed through, and I also really like the letter that SMECO is sending to confirm with consumers that they have received a benefit from the program. But those, they're different markets. You might even have a different type of incentive structure for a measure that's an emergency replacement. Like a water heater is typically sold, it's broken, it needs to be replaced immediately, versus other measures where you may have more time. So there's a lot of nuance to incentive level setting, and I wouldn't say it's the case that midstream programs as a whole always do a particular thing. I think midstream programs intervene in the retail or distribution market, but they may do so with different combinations of incentive, both to the distributor and to the end-use customer.
For a consensus report, we have a lot of more dialogue on this report than any of the other items.
I can add one additional point of consensus here, is that OPC does support the goal of market transformation. We think that it's not enough to inform individual customer choice. We need to do what we can to get everyone to move in the right direction, and we do support that goal. And our disagreement here is about details, not about underlying values and what we should be doing.
Thank you. At this point, the panel could remain seated at the table. I wanted to allow some open mic time for any public comments that would like to be made regarding our Empower program or the track record of the utilities and DHCD over the past 6 months. All right, seeing no takers, once, twice. Commissioner O'Donnell, you could, in your capacity as a private citizen. Well, with that, we'll move to the final piece of our agenda, which is final conclusions from our staff. So, Mr. Hurley, what are your final thoughts for today?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we've had a good 6 months of Empower. with our utilities and with DHCD. We are halfway through the program cycle, and of course, the next program cycle is looming. So I just want to give you a quick update on kind of where we are in the new planning process. So staff had issued a request for program plans in early September. We got about 7 program plan proposals back that we will share with our work group and hopefully invite those parties to come make presentations and answer questions about what their proposals are. Also, we're working with OPC and the utilities to kind of do a couple workshops this fall to occur before the end of this year, to really kind of get an idea of the direction the planning process is going to go, to kind of make sure everyone's kind of on the same track. September 1 is a lot closer than we think it is, so it's going to be an 11-month sprint to this planning process. And I guess one of the key takeaways from today is coordination. You know, we heard coordination of electric and gas, coordination with income eligible and utility plans, coordination of measures within those plans, coordination with PC 44, coordination with PC 51. So all these things will be kind of involved in this process as we develop the plans for next September.
Well, thank you, Dan. I know that you and your staff in the Energy Analysis and Planning Department are doing a lot of work with respect to all of these work groups and leading this very successful Empower program. I'd also like to recognize Amanda Best, who's our Senior Commission Advisor, who does a lot of work behind the scenes and works with the utilities as well to make sure that this program is a success. I've been impressed today. This is my 3rd Empower hearing now. We went from the 2-day format to the 1-day format in the spring, and we'll be meeting with all of you again next April to go over the Q3 and Q4 results. But I really do want to appreciate the work of the utilities, the department, OPC, MEA, and the other parties, including the advocates and the trade professionals that have participated in this. I see a lot of coordination between all of the parties and participants here. But as Dan just said, we now have some additional intersections that complicate things in a good way as we move towards performance-based regulation in PC 51, as we continue to strive to meet the goals that were set a couple of years ago by this commission under grid modernization and PC 44. But I'm very, very optimistic. I would say, as I mentioned at the beginning, I look for efficiencies in everything that we do here. The reporting requirements under Power are somewhat strict, and that we do have reporting forms, and it seems like everybody's in a pretty comfortable place now. But if there are ways that we could improve this program, bring them to the Commission's attention either in this forum or through the work groups, through Dan and his staff. There's a reason why we moved up in the rankings from number 10 in the country to number 7, and it's largely because of the commitment of you and your staff. So I want to congratulate everybody today. We're hitting high marks, and I believe that all of our utilities and the department will hit their goals by December 31st. So thank you. Any additional comments before we conclude today? Mr. O'Donnell.
Just one, as we make that 11-month sprint to next September, Mr. Hurley, don't forget to look at some of the pilots that the commission has authorized that are out there that were designed nominally to inform that planning process. I don't want to wait 4 years down the road to start employing some of that information if it's available. So, okay, thank you. That's it, Mr. Chairman.
No, I said I agree very much with everything the chairman just said. I just wanted to add, I didn't hear a lot. You mentioned, I didn't hear you mention really Maryland Energy Administration, our state's energy office. So I hope that you will make them a very integral part of the process as you look at the next program cycle and looking at some of these other issues that we brought up today.
MEA is always welcome to participate in all of our work groups, so we look forward to work with them.
Yeah, no, our state energy office should be very much a leader in this area, so thank you.
And I guess I would add, in addition to endorsing the comments of my colleagues, that to the extent we're looking forward to the next program cycle, that we should continue to innovate and look at some of the other initiatives that not only the state has adopted, but this commission has moved forward on, especially Grid of the Future related projects. It's important to make sure that they're all moving along at the same path and that we don't fall behind on Empower Maryland while Grid of the Future is advancing and and progressing to the point where we start seeing some imbalances and they start impacting each other.
And I would second that, Commissioner Linton O'Donnell. A number of the programs have been tried and true, and we've been using them for many years, and that's because they've been successful. But things are changing in our industry, and we should always be open to new programs and new ideas. With that, the commission will...
So I'll just say for the record that I've been confused for Commissioner O'Donnell before.
And vice versa.
Separated at birth. The commission will take the requests and recommendations that have been presented to it, either verbally today or in its filings, under consideration, and we will be issuing an order in the hopefully near future. So thanks again for coming, and we will see everybody back here in 6 months.